Hey, everybody, welcome to the Story Studio. As usually happens in the pre-recording broadcasting, we had a discussion going, and then Sean goes, just wait, just start recording.
Start.
Then you get credit.
Yeah. So we were talking about Darren Aronofsky's movie Mother, which I think might be the only Darren Aronofsky movie I've not seen, and I've heard it's pretty bad, but
I don't think it's bad in definition number one, as in it's a bad film. I think it's bad as in
dark.
You won't be able to tolerate the ending, sort of a thing.
Which we won't spoil. So what's I don't even know the premise of the movie. What's the premise of the movie?
Dave, can you do the premise unspoilery?
It is about I'm trying to remember, about a wife and husband that moved to a new place, and she's about to give birth, and these people show up and weird shit happens. It's a very, I want to say something, but I don't know if it spoils.
I feel like it's allegorical, right?
Yes, that's it.
All of this stuff is allegorical.
But this is really allegorical.
Heavily allegorical. And that kind of spoils it if you take it quite literally as
more allegorical than Noah?
Maybe.
Wow. Noah's just on the nose.
Yes, actually, yes.
Right, because Noah's not an allegory.
It is one of those art films that you either see as brilliant or pretentious as fuck, or both.
Like The Fountain?
No, The Fountain was fucking lovely. It was a beautiful movie that made me weep.
Oh, I agree, but you're really gonna say it's not pretentious?
It's not pretentious. It has high ideas, but it doesn't. It's still. To me, pretentious is when somebody is showing off for the sake of showing off, and they don't deliver a good experience. The Fountain was a beautiful experience.
Okay, that's fair.
Pretentious is somebody trying to be like the smartest person in the room, but what they're saying or what they're doing does not affect you in any way whatsoever.
You're like,
fuck you.
Okay, but
yeah.
You referred to
Upstream color.
Okay, upstream color is pretentious. There's no way around that. But you've pretty much you've called Tarantino pretentious. You stand by that?
I just kind of do it to bust your balls. I don't enjoy
this is
everything
the part
he does
where
like you do.
I should have said what the show was about, knowing how big this diversion was going to be.
Yeah, okay. No. We'll take a stop. So wait, just yay or nay on Mother. Should I watch it or not?
I haven't seen it.
You should both watch it just to have watched it and talk about it.
Okay, I'm assuming this is not a movie that Johnny would watch with Robin.
No, I'm very
you shouldn't watch it with anyone. Maybe both of you should watch it together.
Yeah, maybe.
And then have a crying moment together at the
it just doesn't sound like a fun experience. And I'm not the Darren Aronofsky fan that Sean is, or Dave, I don't know if you are. Like they're interesting, but I don't like think he's this amazing, but like, as far as the entertainment value, so I don't even know that I'm like dying to see it.
No,
how did you like Black Swan?
It was good, but I think it had been built up so much that I was expecting it to be like amazing, and it was just like, well, that was interesting. It was good.
Requiem impressed the hell out of me.
Yeah, I loved Requiem. I haven't seen it in a long time, though. I don't think I've seen it since I had children. I think that would probably...
You should let them see it so they never, ever, ever, ever do drugs.
Well, actually, Haley and I will watch it this summer. That's on our list for this.
Sue is asking, what's the target? Do you think that's a second attempt to get us on topic? or no? Maybe?
All right. So, yeah, what's our target?
All right. Well, we were talking about... depending on when you're listening to this, either are just about to release or just released a book called The Story Solution, which is the first of what used to be called the Smarter Artist line in a really long time. It's now called Stone Table, which is the nonfiction books that we do. And the reason we changed it, and this is, you guys already know this, a lot of you, but it was strictly, Smarter Artist was writing craft, writing publishing, like it was very how-to for writers specifically. And Stone Table is a little bit more global. It's about storytelling, but also just big ideas, big issues. A tagline that we were toying with, I don't know if we like it, is like what ideas that need to be shared or something like that. So this is the first one. It's not a big idea book, but it is in the vein of the new Stone Table, and it is our first new nonfiction book in how long? It's been quite a while.
Time, yeah,
it's been like 3 or 4 years. It's called The Story. It's called The Story Solution. And the idea of The Story Solution is it's kind of it's a book for writers, but also a book not for writers and people that just like and understand and want to know more about story, because it's about seeing life through the lens of story. And then conversely, you could reverse engineer it and see story through the lens of life. In other words, a lot, because I wrote this, and there's a story to this, which I can go in if you guys prompt me if you want to. I wrote it at a time where I was just kind of in a weird place. And for me, it ended up being very much about purpose and meaning, because I think that those are the things that you need to get through.
Yeah, I think the origin story of this is actually totally worth talking about. So this is nothing like the book that we were originally intending to write.
I actually think twice. I actually think there was an original time, and then you gave me an outline, and that was the second outline. And I think I then was like, dude, I can't use the outline.
Yeah, and so that outline, I think that we will actually revisit as another book that we'll write within the next year or so. But this book just took a right turn almost immediately. And it happened because Johnny had come back from, this is a year ago, actually, like right now, isn't it? Is that about right?
Yeah, because it was after I had just taken a vacation. And I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but there's a weird thing that can happen on vacation. Sean, I know you've told a few stories about it. I think right before Yesterday's Gone.
Everything will go wrong?
Well, typically it is fun to see vacation through the lens of what if Dave were here? What would Dave do? It's usually what I'm thinking at all times on vacation.
Those should be bracelets. I don't know why they're not.
They should get on whatever
When
Etsy.
we get in the merch game, we'll definitely have a what would Dave do?
So when you sometimes when you come back from a vacation, it's like you pulled away from what you were in day to day, from either life or a relationship or business or work, and you then see it with new eyes, because you're like, no matter whether things are good, whether they're bad, whether they're sideways, whether they're whatever, you just kind of get in the habit of just you're doing it, you're getting through, you're chugging through your to-do list. And then vacation lets you pull away and you're totally out of it and you're in a new place, and then you come back and so you see it with fresh eyes. And that's sort of what happened. And it happened at the time when we were actually transitioning a lot from, well, it wasn't transition, it was a consolidation. Can you describe where the business was and hence where my mind was doing this?
Yeah, so we had already decided, okay, we're closing a bunch of stuff. We're kind of migrating out. We were definitely going full-time story studio. And Johnny went on vacation and came back and was like, yeah, I don't know what my role is going to be, because I stepped away and...
Well, it was a little bit of, the business was in transition, and it was, some of it was my role, but some of it was like, so actually we've run into this a few times. Like, I like to, from the big picture, why are we doing this? From the biggest picture, I need to know why we're doing something. And we were at a point with Sterling and Stone at the time where we were doing a lot of stuff because, like, a lot of things were begun because they were possibilities. This was, not to shit on Sean, but this was the end of the hangover of the Blinds in Manila days, when if something had potential, we would sometimes do it, even if it wasn't aligned. And so we were closing down a lot.
As much as we were beating the drum for everybody about know your why, we weren't really sticking to our why.
So the business was all over the place, and without going into too much depth, we weren't that far from the day when I couldn't satisfactorily make an organization chart for the company, because I didn't. There was no coherent theme. It was like, well, we're doing this and we're doing this, and how are those related? Well, they're not. And
remember that time Danny asked you to write the org chart, and it was like you couldn't get any answers right because we had people instead of positions, and it just was like, no, you guys are all like a bag of...
Yeah, and Danny has a particular way of scolding you about business where it's not really scolding. It's just, he doesn't say that you're an idiot, but that's clearly in the background.
It's the indication.
Yeah, like it's back there. So anyway, the point was that as for the company as a whole, not just my position, but for the company as a whole too, at least in my mind, I couldn't really say what it was about. Like, why were we doing this? What was the single unifying thing behind Sterling and Stone? Were we trying to teach artists? Were we trying to tell stories? Were we trying to sell services? Were we building an online platform for education? And so, but we were already transitioning a lot away. And so
the decisions had been made, but the actions we hadn't fully gotten through it. That's part of it. And there certainly was no aftermath. So now we've already gone through it, and we're on the other side of it now. So there's still aftermath to deal with. There's still transition. There's still stuff to figure out. But it's not like this thing that's in front of us that we're still having to figure out. It's something that we have gone through and are going through and are adapting. But back then, it was just like, it was like knowing you made a big life decision, but it was still in front of you. Okay, we're closing this department. We're going to be all story. And as exciting as that is to say, okay, we're going to be all story, there's a little bit of existential, well, then what the fuck was the last 3 years for? Right?
Right.
And so having a transition around that, just the story solution became a much different book.
Right. So from my perspective, if I don't have like a single locus to say, this is the center, and I'm doing a lot of stuff, but I need to keep mentally training myself to, this is why I'm doing it. This is the major purpose for me on the micro level and for the company on a macro level. And so it was at this point that I started writing the story solution, which was originally going to be like a Who Moved My Cheese, or although that's a parable, but like a small business book that could have applied to everybody. It was going to be about like story branding, basically. It would have been story brand if what's his name hadn't already done that, something like that. And I was like, no, this is not where my headspace is. And it ended up being this this thing of like, because I was searching for meaning and purpose. Because I think that a lot of times today we live largely vacuous lives, if I may make a sweeping generalization, over in the West at least, where it's like, boy, we got a lot to do. We're checking in on our social media feeds and crossing off a lot of notifications and doing a lot of stuff and going through our day. But what the hell is the point? And you get to the point where you go, okay, so why am I doing any of this? What's the meaning? Or am I just recycling yesterday?
That's
and
me
I think
every morning I wake up.
Well, funny you should mention that, Dave. Maybe we could show you some of this that we did in the story.
Dave, actually, this is a serious question. Do you feel like right now your life has more meaning than it did, say, a year ago?
Yes.
Can you? Okay, but you answered that so definitively. In what way? What is the meaning? What's changed?
I think a year ago I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing.
You mean negatively or positively? Or both?
Everything.
Okay.
I was showing up to work, but I was sort of lost, and mentally lost, and just in a dark place. I kind of I've been doing what I was doing for so long, but I don't know, forgot why.
Oh, I love that you're stumbling on this, because something for sure that I've noticed in the last few months from you is a joy in the work. Like you're not just, because you can.
Well, let's not get carried away. Joy is a very big word.
It is a big word.
Yeah, Dave, you would know the whole story of what's going on with you and what Sean thought about it. They're in these story meetings for this company that's not a company.
Right. Dave's a regular character in the meetings. He just doesn't know. But yeah, it's true, because there's a Dave can pound out a story, even if he hates himself through it. He can deliver the words.
Can we publish Dave Pounds It Out?
That's a good idea. He's usually on a cross at those points, though. And it's just like, okay, dude, so you're telling me this was the most miserable experience of your life. I already knew that because of the way it reads, right? We're like, now he's passing something off, and I don't want to say a whimsy, because that's a little bit like joy.
He's totally like Willy Wonka.
There's a lot of dead people in this one.
There was a short
Follow
story.
me to the crypt.
There's a short story I read of Dave's maybe 3 weeks ago, and it was just the breeziest edit, and it wasn't even that it, like, I appreciated
when you were editing it. Did you say I'm breezy?
I'm breezy. I did. I was just I was so grateful at seeing how much Dave had changed, because I get that a lot on the phone and in Slack. Like, he's checking in every morning ish, and
does he text you and say good morning?
No, but it is in Slack, and it is like it's funny because sometimes it's not there yet, and I'm ready to turn off Slack and get to working, and I'm waiting like, okay, I just want to see if Dave's
gonna. Like, what's he gonna do? Text you hi? You gotta wait for that shit.
So I've seen this elevation in his mood, but to see it match with his work, and I don't mean deadlines. That's not actually what I mean. It goes deeper than that.
Thank God.
It goes with the the actual storytelling and the voice that I see. There's less timidity. There's more ownership of the story and the characters. And I don't know, it's more like the Dave that I had 10 years ago, where he was hungry and excited and dreaming a little bit. I see Dave willing to dream a little bit more, which, is kind of funny because our entire company is made up of dreamers. Like, that's what we do.
My dreams have become nightmares.
No, I've noticed that over time. And Dave usually sits the dreaming out. He's like, I don't need to be there with all the dreamers, which is like what we're enjoying. But he's still getting the benefit of that support in the background because it's showing up. So yeah, on with the show.
Well, during summer is a rough time because if I want to get work done, I basically got to do it at night. I can't work during the day with the family home. It's just yeah.
Is family the thing that does not make you feel like you have more meaning?
Ask me when summer's over.
Okay, so do you want to talk about more of the like the general structure of kind of, because
the point is to find, okay, so I feel like I should be able to put my finger on a real clever anecdote here, but it's the sort of thing that's said, and I can't get a neat little bumper sticker, but real life, real life doesn't have meaning, stories have meaning. Like, that's usually the kind of the way that we look at it. It's like, well, look at how neatly that tied up for Meyer Dempsey, or something like that. Like, they have an arc, they have this neat little thing. Like, we focus on them, we see the important pieces of their lives, and real life, by contrast, can feel like it's just you do a string of things, and you're born, and you do things, and then you die.
How about stories a filter through which you see your life?
Right, and that's kind of the whole point of the book. Is I think that at a time when I was trying to find purpose and meaning, and feeling like, now I didn't feel like existential angst or life is meaningless or anything like that. This is a very minor thing, but at the same time, the world as a whole, I think we are in a little bit more of a vacuous time where it is hard to find meaning, and so that is the attempt to bring a story's worth of meaning to the events in your life, if you think of yourself as the protagonist and the events of life as plot twists. So I think you can go either way on this. Writers can learn from the way that life applies to story and vice versa.
Yeah, I like it because it is a little bit out of the writer camp. I think that this book is helpful to everyone. And we did a little in-person thing last October, I want to say. And we had just a group of people who were all 5 of them, was it 5 or 6, something like that. They were all entrepreneurs and not storytellers, but we were using this exact framework. Johnny had the book done, and we were using this framework to kind of reshape their life and their business. And we did another little one right after the summit in a small room of people too. And those were all actual authors. And so you could see that there's a common framework there where it really is just story, using that as kind of a key to unlock understanding. And once you understand something, it's just really easy to break everything else up.
So maybe it does make sense to sort of, take a look at some of the components of this, right? So the actual nitty gritty of, like, how would you shape a story's meaning around real life, right? So I think the number one thing is just understanding that so we've talked about genre therapy a few times on this show, and I think that that's one of the major things that in genre therapy, if you haven't heard about this before, the idea is that in our experience, a lot of the writers we've worked with or met are working in the wrong genre because they got into something because it was hot or because they thought it would work for them, but it isn't maybe as well as it could. And so there's this process that we have called genre therapy, which I'm realizing probably needs a new name because it sounds very confusing. You don't automatically know what genre therapy is, but that's what it is for the writers to kind of like, through a therapeutic means and a Q&A sort of thing, determine what maybe is the right genre for you. And the people who've gone through this, we did a few with Clocking Out. They just, I mean, has anyone not just loved it that you've seen, Sean, and been like, oh my God, this is so illustrative?
No, it's the weird thing that 100% of
one weird trick.
So it is the one weird trick. 100% of participants so far have walked away with something from genre therapy that was like either a key insight, a key directional shift, you know, something like that. I do think it's one of the biggest things that we kind of unearthed in 2018.
So the point of genre therapy for writers is obviously to hone in on like what you really should be doing, but framing it for the story solution was like, a lot of people don't really know what they're going after in life. You may be following goals that your parents set for you, or that society expectations, to be a little grandiose about it. And so that's one of the first things, was kind of really getting clear on what it is that you should be going after. I'm unsure how granular we should go on this, Sean. What's your gut feel on this? Because there's a lot to it, and it's not like we're doing a master course on it. We just kind of
I would keep it simple. I would just like, I'm serious about using Dave as kind of like
well, why don't we begin with it then? Why don't we?
All right, so let's actually talk genre therapy.
Lie on the psychiatrist's couch.
I think you should. So if we're talking genre, like, what is your genre? So in the book, we don't, you know, it's not mystery or thriller or sci-fi or anything like that. It's more like, you know, a husband with kids, you know, family man, artist, you know, like, to me, your genre would be like tortured artist. That's what fits you. Like, I'm not even like, it sounds like I'm joking, but I'm actually not. Like, that is kind of your genre, right?
I'm picturing the tortured artist shelf at Barnes and Noble.
Don't you feel like you fit neatly into that?
Yes. I think most of my art comes through suffering. Okay,
so here's a really good example. Going back to like the first times I knew you, you realize that it was like a few years before I knew that would be the genre you would fit into, even though we talked all the time, right?
Yes, because you see the world through very different
nose-colored glasses.
No, it wasn't that. It's that you weren't clear on your story. So you were writing for Blogger Dad, which was very much not a tortured artist type of site.
Well, I have two sides to me. I have the humorous, loving side, then I have the tortured artist side.
You have to know your story.
I am many things.
Otherwise, you're not clearly communicating.
I'm a variety show.
Well, that is true too.
Picture.
But so here's a few factoids about when I met Dave.
Siempre en domingo.
Well, we make a Jeopardy board for the factoids of when Sean met Dave. I can see that. Let's do a Rob Reiner movie.
I would watch that. So Dave had a very colorful, cartoony, a lot of like blues and just like,
this was fun. He totally catfished you.
He totally did. He talked about like being a father and family and like. One of the first things I ever read from Dave was Farewell to the F Word and how he's not going to swear around his son.
Hey, remember the time Dave said he wasn't going to swear around his son?
I really don't that often.
Yeah.
Except when you yell cunt from the front seat really loudly.
No, I said motherfucker.
All right.
I don't think I said cunt in front of him before.
I think you have. I'm pretty sure.
Remember.
All right. Anybody listening now wants to dig up which episodes that is?
Okay.
So, you know, Dave also had a drawing of himself, you know, on his header. And the drawing of himself was like this tall, skinny dude with a giant smile. So it's so not me having like some rosy vision of Dave. It was how Dave was working really hard to present himself to the world.
No, that's another side of me. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't
You're
a fiction.
You're a skinny dude?
No.
Where is that side of you, Dave?
It's my inner skinny guy. I do see myself as a skinny dude, like internally, yes. So.
Well, okay.
I'm a lot like Jesus.
Well, there's got to be. There is technically a skinny guy in there somewhere.
Yeah, I ate him.
All right. My point is, once you're more aware of your genre, you could be a clearer job of attracting the people to you. Because here's what happened. Like, tell me if you remember this history differently than I do, because I remember this pretty clearly. It was after about, I don't know, and I don't mean a big general, sweeping generalization here, but definitely there was a point where you were finding you were not connecting with your average reader at that site. And so they had kind of and I had the same thing, because I had built Writer Dad to be, I never swore. And I definitely had this little neat fence around what I was doing. And you and I both found that we didn't have as much common with some of our audience as we would have liked to have. And that's because we were definitely getting a very certain particular type of reader. And so if we're more ourselves, like we didn't have that once we put ourselves over on like the collective Inkwell side, and we were publishing, live available Darkness chapters and stuff like that, we started to warm up and become more of who we would be later, like with this show and with Yesterday's Gone and all the stuff we've done together since. But when we were doing the parallel of Blogger Dad and Writer Dad, there was a really big chasm between what we said publicly and the conversations we had privately.
You guys are like that moment where you discover that Bob Saget is actually really dirty.
Yes. No, exactly. That is exactly what it was. And so Johnny never had that.
And Mr. Rogers.
Right.
Johnny was just like loud and proud from the beginning. Like he came out and said what he wanted to say online.
Yes.
And, had that voice. And you and I were both trying to, I had a preschool at the time. You were probably trying to keep a certain tone for your wife and your family and trying to get syndicated. And so if you're going to be if you're going to be the next Dave Barry, there's a certain kind of tone you have to have. But if you had
I quickly went against my own tone, though. Like
Dave Barry has a lot of necrophilia stuff, though.
My darkness crept in my the drawings I did for the children's book, like Bob the fucking bear.
Yeah, that's true.
Bob the fucking bear. I want to see that.
But look how discordant that was.
Clifford takes a big dump. People liked it, though. I think I did connect with a lot of my audience. I think they liked me.
I think you definitely connected with your audience.
Oh, you totally connected with your audience. But what I'm saying is that it's easier to connect with your audience if you didn't, like, there was already a filter there. You're the dad guy who has to do this. If you were the tortured artist guy from the beginning who had Clifford takes a big dump, then it's just more resonant right away. And so, like, we figured that out. The first time I figured that out, like, I know I've told this story before, but it's worth telling in this context. The first time I figured out that there was this big, giant difference between the way that Dave and I had seen the world. And we had been working together for a while at this point. Do you know this story? Do you know which one this is?
Go ahead.
It was something we had started the collective Inkwell blog, which really the only point for that in the early days was to get us freelancing gigs.
Mm-hmm.
And, like
where I critiqued websites.
Yeah, critique websites, and we were writing advice. And so it was, it was fine. And but there was a piece of content that I wrote for the site called "The Myth of the Tortured Artist."
Yeah.
And I wrote it, and like Dave's like, I don't agree with anything in this. And it was talking about how like writing should not be painful. You should sit down, get your words done, be done. It doesn't have to come from this place of misery and fucking heartache and shit. And Dave's like, yes, it does. And I thought you were kidding with me because you were so like adamant about how painful writing is and like that was the first time. And that was probably like 2010, 2009. It was a long time ago. And so like I realized, oh, this is a struggle for you. You're fundamentally different than me.
Yes.
But I feel like if we had some of these tools 10 years ago to understand each other and to understand our world, and there's a little bit of Story Solution, there's a little bit of love language stuff there, where if you've read
if we had discovered it earlier, though, you might not have ever taken Johnny on as another lover. You wouldn't have stepped outside of our marriage.
That's probably true. That is actually probably true. So
because he stopped at me, right?
We need these.
He doesn't have anyone else he collaborates with.
Whore. I think, and all of these are kind of related. You know, what is your genre? What is the tone of your life? What is your voice? Like,
well, I mean, the point is that I think that as an author, you get to decide these things for your character. You get to decide they're after this thing. They have this tone and affect. They what are the other things I'm not forgetting, I'm remembering some of the things with voice and stuff, but the ways that you approach things, the ways that you get to design those things for your characters. But we just sort of say, well, for ourselves, like it is what it is.
We are, or whatever.
Right. The whole point here is consciously like looking at yourself as if you were a character, and because you get to make those decisions and orchestrate, a worthy challenge and successes and stuff as you would for a character. Well,
you're
that's
more likely
coming up,
to give your characters goals than you are yourself goals. Right? You're more likely to think about what is your character's superpower than you are what is your own superpower, or what is the hook of this story instead of what is the hook of your own story.
What is the backstory of the character and how did it shape them? And do they have, mother's voice in the back of their head when they shouldn't? They don't even realize it. Like, these are the sorts of things that all of us are doing, and we just don't realize it because we aren't thinking as if we would with the story, but it's all still true.
If we approached our own lives and our own stories with the same amount of craftsmanship that we do the stories that we tell our readers, we would have better lives. That's the premise of the book. And it's something that, Johnny and I have very much been allegiant to, kind of always in a way that wasn't defined. And in the last year, very much so. And we've been trying heartily to bring Dave along for the ride. And, so another thing, you talk about settings, right? So settings are super important to your characters, but a lot of us just kind of live where we live. We don't really think about our setting. We don't really think about how it's shaping or affecting us. And for the last few years, we've been very much on Dave about how is your setting affecting you? How does it shape your day-to-day? How does it make you happy or less happy?
Johnny was in Florida. That's all you need to know.
Right. Well, and setting is...
That's my setting.
I mean, my character, for want of a better term, has a whole new realm of experience because my setting changed. But setting is also the people that are around you. If you're writing a story and you want to bring out a certain aspect of a character, you need something on display, you'll usually give them some sort of a foil. So you'll give them a wisecracking sidekick who always delivers truths at the right moment. You'll give them a judgmental father-in-law or something like that. You give them somebody in whose, like, in the reactions to those people in those discussions, you can see certain aspects of the character. So that's being true. That's true of you as well. Our setting, the people around us, the characters around us are defining us. The only difference is that they came into our lives, I wouldn't say accidentally. It's not like circumstance, but casually, like without conscious thought, because
but also,
they were
like, you don't have the difference is in real life. Okay, so in your story, you're the god. You have control. You can decide what characters belong in the story and what characters don't. And if there's a character that your hero needs
to the fuck out of them.
Yeah, you basically give them a tool set to deal with that character or to not, but you're in control. In real life, we don't always have control of the characters around us. I mean, the more successful we are, the more freedom we have. So you get to choose who's in your life or not. I mean, at this point,
to eliminate.
Yeah, I mean, like at this point, I've got.
Like, well, there is that. I mean, there is the idea of, we get used to the idea that this person is one of my friends from high school and they live next door, and so they've always been in my life and always will be. But you have to ask, if you in a novel, you would ask whether that relationship is useful to the story. Is it relevant? You really shouldn't have a lot in a story that isn't ultimately relevant in some way, shape, or form. And if you have that with a character, I'm actually forgetting how you began this, but excising. So I talk about that in the book. Is there are times when, in a story you might kill the characters off. Well, you can't do that. Sorry, Dave. But
what?
You can choose not to have those characters in your life.
I'm God, though.
Well, so actually, this is kind of an interesting topic as well, is theme. So I actually did a little introspection while writing to decide, like, what would be the theme of my life? Like, what is the thing that is the core of what I'm about? And I think that if you have that, it gives you a center to keep coming back to. Does this serve my ultimate theme? So I'm actually curious as to what Dave's theme might be. So to grease the wheels on this, one of mine is optimization, or improvement is better. I always want to improve things. Like it doesn't matter what I'm doing. I always want to get better. If I'm in something
Dave wants to ruin things
that I can't improve, I'm not interested. If I feel like Sean, I'm guessing yours is, I feel like it would be innovation or exploration. Does that feel right?
It does feel right.
And Dave, I see some of the things I see in you are like justice. What are the major themes that you feel like you run up against again and again as a person, not just a creator?
I think it's exploration of myself, of my past, how to change the things.
Well, you're really in touch with your origin story, I think. Like, that, being bullied, growing up, having to cope with shit that taught you to use the pain. And
yes.
So, right. And that enabled you in a way. Like, how in touch are we with our origin story? How did it define us? And how much are we just accepting because, okay, these are the characters that have always been in my life ever since the origin story, and, on and on.
Yeah, I think like I turn to stories as escape from childhood pain. And I think for a long time I tried to understand why, why I was alienated, why, I was just different. And those things, like,
is it because you were trying to show all the other children your penis all the time?
No, that wasn't. That was only you. No, the thing is, like, when you're like where I just never quite fit in where I was. The first 10 years of my life, I grew up as like one of the only white kids in my neighborhood. So I stood out there. And then I moved to the suburbs where I was like just not one of the cool kids. I was I was a lot like you, Sean, like super happy and optimistic, if you can believe it.
Yeah, you keep telling me that. It's really hard to picture.
But I was also poor, and I got fat. I had zits all over. So like all of that shit just made me stand out. And I basically learned to use the pain to write stories, to escape. And also, like, I learned to connect with people through it. Like, there were people I would not talk to, or wouldn't talk to me, I should say. And when I started writing stories, I remember this one dude that sat next to me. He was a popular dude, and I had absolutely nothing in common with him. He wasn't a bully or anything to me, but just kind of ignored me. One day he saw me writing a story, and he asked to see what it was. And he was like, holy shit, like, this is awesome. And like that moment where I connected with somebody that I had absolutely nothing in common with, but story was really cool. And then I just started writing in class every day, not doing my schoolwork, but I was writing in class every day, and I'd hand it to him and he'd show other people. And that was like a cool moment where I could connect with people in a way that removed me from the equation.
So here's what's interesting to me, and a question that I would have is because, I mean, I think like introspection as a theme to me feels like a means to an end. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but it feels like you're introspecting so that you can do something else. But it's weird to think that it might be connection, like connecting through shared experience, because you don't generally, like, it's weird. We see you at this, like the events that we've done, you genuinely like interacting with people. You go to
on a very
room,
small, like 1-to-1 sort of, or 1-to-2, like just a few, like too many people overwhelm me. I'm very introverted.
But I wonder, does that feel like sort of a driving force? Is that you want to connect, you want to find commonality? Is it too grand to say that like it's a world thing? Like you'd like to see what's the commonalities are in the world rather than the differences we see?
Honestly, if not to get too, I don't know. I just want to do what books and story have always done for me, and art, which is to help other people escape, to help other people, see that they're, even if they are alone, it doesn't always have to be that way. That, because I think I beat myself up a lot and blame myself for so many things. I hated myself for so long. And if I could go back in time to change that, I would, but I can't. So I'm sort of doing it through my stories, if that makes any sense. I don't know if my stories actually do this, but that's my goal. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
No, I think your stories are definitely not for all the Lord's children, but for the people who connect with, the way that you write, that's why they're connecting. They are connecting through shared pain, and I think that that's really important. And I think that you don't have to walk away from, here's the mistake I think you've made a lot of your life. I think that you feel like that's your source of power is your pain, because that's where you've drawn on before. It's this reservoir that you can tap into. And so you're able to create art by, experiencing more pain. And, this does go all the way back to that article, about the myth of the tortured artist. I think you can create art that way, but do you have to create art that way? Absolutely not. And I think that you've connected the two. In your head, it's almost like, this may be a weird parallel, but stay with me. It's almost like a fetish, right? Like if somebody
don't get sexual gratification.
No, but like if something is actually, this is kind of a funny story. So the reason I really understood, see if you remember the source of this. The reason I understand fetishes as well as I do is because of something you beat out for me like several years ago for a story we were doing back when we were writing a lot of porn. And you were like, I don't think you wanted to be involved in this at all, but you were doing it. So you gave me beats and you had me, the character had to get with somebody who had a very particular fetish, and you wrote it into the beats, cackling. Like, I remember you laughing hard, and the fetish you gave me was a loony. Somebody who's like into the sound of balloons.
They're very into Canadian dollars.
And so I'm like, what? I have to go research this, because I'm not just going to write it. So I researched, and I found like this really fascinating article by this guy it was like a confessional about why he had this particular fetish and where it was born. And it, like, I understood fetishes in a way that I hadn't before, where something is like basically crystallized at some moment, prepubescent, where this, like let's say you're at a birthday party and all the children are out there and you hear the sound. This was his story. You hear the sounds of the popping balloons while you're having like your very first sexual experience in another room. So those two things are just linked forever, or,
like and having sex with cake.
I'll just let that sit there.
You see the moment where all right, there it was. That was it. Well, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think that Dave has always connected those two things. I was able to. It's like a cycle. It's the flywheel of what he's going through. He feels this pain. He taps into the pain. He creates art. It gives him a release valve. He feels better. He taps into it again. He feels more pain, and it just keeps going round and round. But that's he can actually remove himself from that, draw on old pain. He doesn't have to live in it. He doesn't have to sit in it. He can draw on it. But I think, as working in a studio full of productive artists who have like a spectrum of how happy or unhappy they are.
He doesn't know that we work with other artists.
Wait, there's other people?
Okay, all right. Let me rephrase that. You've worked with me for 10 years, right? Do you know a lot of people who are more buoyant than me?
Yeah, you and Johnny have provided most of my inner motivation that I have the past few years, or most recently the past year. And there is a part of me that is very much into optimization and all that. I listen to a lot of podcasts that, Johnny probably listens to or would listen to.
Do they star Johnny? Because I think those are the only ones he listens to.
So, I'm very much about like improving myself, although I know that doesn't sound like me at all. But yeah, you guys have provided great examples of, doing the work and getting the work done and getting out of your mind. And I think that's the hardest part. For
it's interesting though, because you do that. You'll turn in a draft where it's obvious that you had more fun with it and the story is better. And then one where you're just kind of miserable, it's not. But in your head, the one where it was miserable almost feels like it's more deserving or something, like you paid the price for the art.
For me, the longer a story is, or the more complicated, or if it's like the end of a series or something, it does become like just the fucking battle. Short stories, though, like that's my sweet spot. I wish they sold better because I could do that all day, every day, and they'd be like whimsical.
Right. And do you remember the last meeting we had just a couple of days ago? That was exactly it. You're mapping out this big thing, and I'm like, no, that's for me to write. I'm going to give you a novella. Because I want to keep things small right now, because I want you to feel that cascade of success, because that just makes it easier to do stuff.
Well, the idea is that once you have some of these defining initial things, the genre therapy idea, the considering theme or the voice, or what are the
like know what your plot points in life are. Like,
well,
right?
that's exactly where I was going to go. Is once you have that, then you have a character who has a motivation, who probably has an antagonist of some. I mean, we all have an antagonist. Sometimes it's just like life, right? It just gets in your way. You know, Dave had a bunch of literal antagonists. But then if you see that as, like, if this were a story, it's like a retroactive conditioning, right? So, like, if Dave were the character of a story and the story was at the, midpoint or whatever, like everything at the beginning was like, that was your origin story. There was an arc there, and it set you up to be the person that you're going to be. You had antagonists who shaped you in a certain way. And so this is where I think it gets kind of interesting, is saying like, what was, because I think that we all have ups and downs, and when we're in the middle of them, then they feel like ups or they feel like downs, which may sound like very, well, duh. But if you're in a down, if you're in like a bad place, it can feel like, wow, I fucked up, I failed, like life's over, I screwed something up. But those twists always happen in stories. And there's, usually a reversal where everything changes right at about the halfway point. There's a point where the character faces a challenge and then has to make a decision to go on a journey and then has to have a moment of courage. So being able to see those things relative to the stuff that we were just talking about. So like in Dave's case, like, do you have, like, can you imagine like what would the journey be that you went on? Do you remember kind of when you went on it? Do you have an act 1 turning point that you remember? Like a moment, like an inciting incident. So something where you're like, okay, fuck this, I'm doing X.
Yeah.
And then the moment where you're like, okay, I'm doing it whole hog, bitches. Like, I'm in this. Going on the journey.
I think a year ago or a year and a half or whatever, our meeting. So
that's actually great.
So that okay. So basically, when I was younger, my best friend growing up was a guy named Todd, and we grew up in high school. He went off, joined the Navy, and he came back to visit me, and he was like one of the only people that believed in me as a writer and shit. So he's always trying to, like, get me to get off my ass and do shit and move to Virginia with him and, live like we were supposed to live, like we planned to live, and all that shit. So in 96, he came to visit me in February, and he had changed in a lot of ways. Like when I first met him, he's like this geeky sort of quiet kid, and really an obnoxious asshole too, though. But we got along, and like he changed, and he became like very almost like all alpha and shit, like completely
aggro.
He was
aggro. Well, in a bit, but he was still, we still got along, but the last time I saw him, he was like really getting on my ass about, you were fucking throwing your life away. And I really did not take it well, because I was taking it like, who the fuck are you? Like, no. So the last time I saw him, we got in this like huge argument because he was trying to get me to get the fuck out of Florida. And I'm like, no, I have my reasons and all this. And so when he left, I was like, all right. And I just let him go. Like, I didn't say goodbye. I was just so pissed at him, and I let him walk down the stairs and leave, and didn't say goodbye to him, which is not.
You didn't shove him.
Right, yeah. Throw him off the stairs. So he left, and I figure, eventually everything will be cool because, we've had a few arguments in the past, and whatever. Whenever we saw each other, it was just like, old friends reuniting, and everything was cool.
Reunited, and it
Exactly.
feels so good.
I was going to do that for the record.
So on April 2nd, I get a phone call from somebody I didn't know who it was. And I was like, who's it? It's like, yeah, I'm Todd Zant. He's dead. So I was like, fuck. So that moment was like my worst moment. And I mean, obviously it was his worst moment. He died. So his worst moment was worse than mine. But like, I just felt my whole world go away. And I had a lot of self-hate and self-blame for, you know, how things ended with him. And I just felt awful. So flash forward to last year at our dinner that we all had together. And Sean was basically saying a lot of the same things Todd was saying, like, you're fucking wasting your life away, blah, blah, blah. And exactly, he did say blah, blah, blah. So Sean's basically saying, dude, I'm watching you waste away. I don't fucking like it. You know, if you want to go down that road, you go down that road, but I'm not going to go with you. And it felt very much like that moment with Todd. I was like, all right. So I had a lot to think about, and I drove home and I was thinking about all this shit that I wasn't doing where I needed to be. And that was like, I just didn't want to see that repeat itself. Because Sean would die, obviously.
Well, what's interesting about that is that is that an Alfred Hitchcock quote that says drama is life with the boring bits cut out or something like that?
I think that is Hitchcock.
Yeah, I think it's Hitchcock. So the idea is that, you know, we all, if you're 40 years old, you've lived 40 years of life. That's a lot of activities. It's not just a few key things that describe like this one little character arc. But, and that would be true of a 40-year-old character as well, right? Like in theory, they've lived a life off of the page. But we're picking the pieces of story that we want to assemble as authors. And that's what I think a lot of the stuff that we were trying to describe in the story solution is it's as much about eliminating what's not the story. And I don't mean literally, but at least, you know, turning aside from it and focusing on the stuff that is the story of you as the character. So in Dave's example, like, I feel like the Todd story, that's backstory. And the, this dinner would have been either the inciting incident or the end of Act 1 or both, at which point Dave begins to go on a journey, and he's on it right now.
Right, because you have to refuse the call the first time no matter what.
Well, and you would also it actually is, it has a tragic start. It's not like, you would want that to happen, but it almost is perfect in its way because wait a minute.
Side, right?
You had two parallel things and they said the same thing. You refused the call the first time. Like, that's the sort of thing in a story.
It is
like,
story.
Sure.
Right. It sounds very written. So he's got the mentor character that's trying to, like, even though they're peers, he's still serving the mentor role. Hey, come here. You've got to live life, go to adventure, come with me to Alderaan. And Dave's like, I don't want to go to Alderaan. Right. And then so that's what happens. There's
maybe if it was Alderaan, I would have gone, but it was Virginia Beach.
So, that is the case. And then he got to another midway point. So if we're seeing that, then, we should have a little more difficulty, which would make sense. And then some big breakthrough in climax, which is Dave's big hit, which we'll have in the next couple of years. And then, whatever happens after that. But
although you really shouldn't space those events out 20 fucking years.
No, you shouldn't. But that is it. So Johnny and I did something that it's one of my favorite things that we did. It's so ridiculous, but it's in the Unicorn Western series, and we had the character had to jump forward a bunch of years, and just to show that it'd been a long time. He's like, "Look how big my beard is," right? Because in a movie, all this time has passed. So, like, that's what happened with you. All this time passed, and you didn't do very much with that time, not nearly as much as you could. And that was part of what I really wanted to impress upon you during that dinner is, like, dude, 10 years ago, you had all these dreams. 10 years ago, you were hungry, and, like, you were going to do all of this, and now you're just, like, you've given up, and I don't get it. And having you hungry feeds me in a weird way. Having Johnny hungry feeds me. Like, I want the people around me to be hungry and excited and all of that. So seeing you a little more lit up, it allows you it makes my story better. It makes Johnny's story better. It makes your story better. But you actually have these movable plot points that you can give more, more consideration to and do a better job with your own story.
And I think, a lot of what really helped me is that I think I do get lost in my own story. I get lost in the bad shit that happened because that defines so much of my life. And it is a story I was telling myself. And you guys, by example and by the things you say, you have shown me that there's another story happening that I'm not aware of, that I can write myself. I can write my own ending, and I just need to fucking pick up the pen and do it.
Yeah, that could be a tagline for Story Solution right there. You write a different ending, write a better ending.
Yeah, I mean the events in a story always have to have purpose and enough that people will say, "Oh, well, it wasn't that convenient," right? Like there needs to be purpose in this. And so the point is, again, I just keep thinking of like retcon, right? Like going back and rewriting the meaning, reframing the meaning of things that may have already occurred or that are going to occur. Is what would be the meaning that you could apply to this? So like I have my origin story with I was in a lab counting fruit flies, and I realized I was having panic attacks and I couldn't do it anymore. And then I had to make the decision to take a leap and go off of that path that I'd been on, that academic path.
You should have gotten bitten by a radioactive fruit fly.
Then it would have been really, really cool. Then I could have had a true origin story. But the thing is, at the time, that was just like terrible. It was just not fun, and it felt like everything was falling apart. And only with this lens, I don't know if I could have done it at the time, but looking back, I go, oh, okay, that was necessary. That was something that I can give meaning to if I want to give meaning to it. And I think that's the choice that we make. We either just say that these things happened and they either went this way or they didn't, or you can say that, no, that's purpose and it's driving toward this conclusion. So I'm going to make my actions in the moment and make my decisions today reflective of like what I would do in a story if I were choosing for that character. Okay, well, that just kind of ended. That's well, the point is, this was a really interesting book to write. It felt like it was the right book for me at the time, and I think that it's for anybody who just kind of, what's it all about, like those sorts of questions, or for writers. I actually think it is a really good book for writers because you'll see that there's another way to look at story as well, although it wasn't written primarily for writers. It's sort of for everybody. And it's going on sale in a few days, or you'll probably be on for you guys that are on the feed. So sterlingandstone.net/story solution. You can check it out. Anything to add? Any final thoughts? Anything at all?
No, other than I want to read it again. I haven't read it since I was done with the edit, but I kind of feel like reading it now.
Yeah, I kind of want to listen to the audiobook, but there isn't one. So when we have an audiobook, I want to listen to it.
I will also listen to it.
You can read it if you want. It's all ready.
Oh, okay.
So sterlingandstone.net/story solution. And thank you all for a bunch of new people joined us live today. Not a lot of interactivity, which is fine. We're sort of learning this as we go, but it's nice to see you guys out there and to know that you're here. And that's great. So, and actually, if you want to get reminders of the live show, you can go to sterlingandstone.net/live show and get on that list. So I guess we'll see you next time. And thanks, everybody.
I should get on that list so you can remind me when we're doing a show.
There you go.
That's a really good idea.
All right. Closing point for that. And bye, everybody, and see you next time.